Sorry.
So, what do I think about the issue of Islamophobia?
Yes.
Well, ever since the Islamic world or Muslims have been in contact with, say, Christianity, which it goes back, of course, into the 9th century, actually into the 8th century, there's been conflict, as you might imagine. You had, of course, the crossover into Spain, and then there were Islamic groups which had gone across the Pyrenees into France, what we now consider France, and then there was the Battle of Tours, where Charles Martel is well known, which historians say that was the end of the northern expansion into Europe by these early Los Moros, they say in Spanish, that came forward. So from that time, as you might imagine, because it happens everywhere in the world, it doesn't matter where you are, when one group comes in and attacks another group, there's conflict. Each group has stereotypes, anger, frustration about the other group. So you had, I think in the 9th century, the Venerable Bede, B-E-D-E, he was an English cleric, Christian cleric, who referred to this and talked about them as Saracens, was one of the early terms used for the Muslims, and he said they were a scourge, right? So throughout the medieval period, you have a number of Christians who saw Islam as a heretical offshoot of Christianity, but we're also concerned about the sort of the political dimensions, right, of individuals coming in. At one point, when the Muslims were first in Sicily, they managed to even go as far as the Vatican. All right, didn't stay there very long. So and then, of course, later on in history, when you get into the 16th and 17th century, you have the Ottomans coming in and even besieging Vienna. All right, so there's the history of interaction. And so it's not surprising that one group would have anger and frustration and say terrible things about another group. So I think that's important to note. Islamophobia was not invented recently, right? It's been there for a very long time. When we're talking about the current situation, there are several factors that come to mind. But it's important to remember that when we talk about Islamophobia today, we're talking about a political dimension of Islam. It's the political dimension. And it's really not so much what Muslims were doing to Muslims. The West really wasn't paying any attention to that. But it's what Muslims were perceived, or some Muslims were doing to the West. And so you had the situation, I mean, you could start almost anywhere, but let's start with the Iranian hostage crisis in when the Shah was deposed and the members of the American embassy were held hostage. And that was really played up in the United States. That was something that brought Islam, but a very politicized version of Islam here. It wasn't Christian against Muslim. It was Iran and a new regime against the American embassy. Okay, so that created this idea that there's this political dimension that's violent, anti-American, anti-Western. And that has been going all along. I mean, Iran has a history, death to America. We all saw that chant, death to America, death to America. That doesn't mean that the majority of Iranians think that way. I seriously doubt they do. And nor does it mean that it's official policy of the government of Iran. But it was propaganda. But then you've had, the news events have gone on since then. Of course, the situation that evolved in Afghanistan, of course, the bombing of the Twin Towers, all of these events, and then lately, of course, with the Al-Qaeda and then ISIS, the beheadings, the sort of the media attention. The vast majority of the media attention in the West is on these violent extremist actions that are politically motivated. And so we're dealing with, the thing that makes it a little bit different today than it was historically is that we have social media. So, in the past, some group in Iraq beheads someone. Who would have known? Right? Maybe a newspaper reporter would have heard about it. The time a photograph would arrive somewhere is Here, it's instantly put up on an account. It's on YouTube, it's on Twitter, it's on Instagram, whatever it happens to be. And there's no way to prevent this happening. So you have this media presentation of a very violent form of Islam, provoking, wanting, of course, it's a provocation of the West. And of course that leads to all the attention paid in the media. And if you're an average person in the West, the vast majority of information you get from the media, whether it's the internet or TV, or, cable, or most newspapers, is about killing. It's about violence. So I guess the first point to make is that when we're talking about Islamophobia, it's the political dimension that is the most relevant here, and always has been. I mean, people may justify it and say, oh, it's because of what they believe. But, give you an example. When the coverage was made of the individuals who took those airplanes into the Twin Towers in New York, one of the rationales that was given in some of the media, Muhammad Atta, I think, was one of the people, he did this because he wanted to go to heaven and have 72 virgins. Really? Really? I mean, I don't think so, right? It was a political motivation. His anger, he wasn't looking forward to going to heaven. Come on. His anger was directed at events in this world. But to put that kind of a spin on it, as though somehow it was a religious motivation. And religion is often a veneer. Okay, let's take the situation in Northern Ireland. Okay, Northern Ireland, Catholics were against Protestants, but it really wasn't Catholics versus Protestants in a real sense. It was those people in Northern Ireland who thought that the British, who had taken over and created Northern Ireland, had separated it from Ireland. It was a political battle. Or even let's take the situation in Palestine. Everyone focuses now on Hamas. It's an Islamic group. It's considered an Islamic terrorist group. All right. But there are many Palestinians who happen to be Christian. And certainly not all Palestinians are even affiliated or support Hamas. And here's a clear example where it's sort of obvious Palestinians are upset that they were thrown out of their land. This is a political issue. And now that gets blown up into Muslims and Jews. And you run into this problem where the political issue is Zionism. Judaism is different from Zionism. There are Jews who are pro-Zionist, and there are Jews who are totally against what Israel is doing. In fact, the most Orthodox reject the secular government. They're often a thorn in the side. The most Orthodox Jews reject of this. So we have to be careful that we don't look at this term Islamophobia as though somehow it's about Islam. It's about a politicized version of Islam. That's the problem. But that gets then pushed onto other issues as though somehow being a Muslim in itself is more violent than being a Christian or being a Jew. Now, if you look at it historically, that's nonsense. If you think about the horrific wars that happened after the so-called Reformation, right? Were in Germany, the peasant wars, and the Holocaust. The Holocaust didn't begin with Hitler against Jews. That's been going on for a long time. It's nothing new. But again, if you really probe it, there's usually something economic or something political going on. It's not, well, you pray this way or you have this belief about the afterlife. People don't generally go to war or kill someone over that. There's usually some other motivating factor in that. And so the issue, and another issue is that if you look at the West in particular, let's take the United States. Most people in the United States don't actually know a Muslim. They don't have a neighbor who's a Muslim. They may not be working with someone who's a Muslim. At the university, they may actually they meet people who are Muslims. Okay, that's a little bit different. So there's ignorance. There's tremendous ignorance about what is a religion. And what they see is all the violence. And they hear the extreme forms, or they see Saudi Arabia, the Salafi, Wahhabi, which is a very, very conservative form. However, it has spread because of the fabulous wealth that is underneath it to spread it to other countries. But, there are well over 1.5 billion people in the world, many of them obviously too young, who are Muslim. And if you were to count up the number who are jihadis, it would be such a small fraction of those people. And the vast majority of Muslims do not live in the Middle East. The largest Muslim country is, what do you think?
I guess Indonesia.
Indonesia, right?
Yeah.
And Indonesia has a very different style of Islam than Saudi Arabia or than Iran. And there are various aspects of Islam in Indonesia. It's been there quite a while. It's lived in harmony with Hinduism, with Buddhism. It's evolved in a different way. They have their own intellectual tradition that is even less known in the West, right? I mean, they see this, the Saudis, they see all this kind of stuff. They hear about Iran, but they hardly know anything about Islam there. Before that, the largest country, if you will, with Muslims was the Soviet Union, because of all the Central Asian republics. Who's talking about Islam in Central Asia? Yeah, you hear about Chechnya. Or what about the Muslims in China? You hear about the Uyghurs. They're one group. So there's a profound ignorance in Africa. I mean, and when we hear about Islam in Africa, we hear about either the Shabab in Somalia or Boko Haram, which are very, very small militant groups that are being fought by, they're killing fellow Muslims as well as killing anyone else. So a lot of it is ignorance, simply not knowing, not having an understanding of the others. And there's sort of an escalation that happens. It's similar to the Cold War. Back when the world was you were either communist or free world, right? The Eastern Bloc versus the so-called Western Bloc. And there was this sort of rhetoric that, we're going to have more missiles than you, Soviet Union, we're going to have more missiles than you, United States. And the rhetoric sort of escalates, and sometimes it spills over into violence. And that's what we're seeing right now. And I mean, there are imams in many countries in the Middle East, and even outside the Middle East, who will close their khutbah by saying, curse the Jews. Wonderful. Isn't that great? Okay, what's this about? I mean, and that's a political statement. This is not the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad talked about the Ahl Kitab, right? It was the Jews who welcomed him into Medina. And he did not call for a holy war against Christians and Jews. I mean, this is all a political, structure referring to the present day. The problem is not the Jews. The problem is Israel. That's a political issue. But then you say, curse the Jews, right? Or curse the Christians. Okay, that's as bad as saying curse the Muslims. So you have the rhetoric on one side equal from many people, as bad as the rhetoric on the other. And what we need is more understanding that, something that was very interesting. You've seen, and although this is Palestine, the new Pope Francis has recognized 2 Palestinian Christian as saints, and the Vatican has recognized the state of Palestine. Now, are you going to say Christians are bad when, if you're a Muslim, you're probably upset about what's happening to the Palestinians, and not just the Muslim Palestinians? Well, here's the Pope, this new Pope, saying the Palestinians, and the Pope is, when he made that, there were Muslims with him. I mean, he is very much an interfaith individual. He's not saying curse the Muslims. Okay, you have the right-wing extremists. Very, very few. Some of them are saying curse the Muslims, right? That's for sure. But you have even more, I think, in the Islamic world who are somewhat irrational in what they're saying. And so all of this rhetoric sort of makes for this thing you're calling Islamophobia. And phobia means a fear. Right? So, the world has nothing to fear from Muslims. It has nothing to fear from Jews. It has nothing to fear as individuals or as a religious system, because there are various ways of interpreting it. There's so many different branches of Christianity, so many different, and it's not just Sunni and Shia. It's a very arbitrary sort of distinction here. So I guess the final issue is what can be done. Well, to the extent that Muslims are in diaspora, and many are, and many more are now because of the horrible killing that's going on in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, that's good, because the more that people outside of the so-called major Islamic world interact with Muslims, and many of them are highly professional, that's one thing to counter Islamophobia. The difficult thing is the media. The media is there to be sensational. That's what the media is there. It's not to, most media are not really there to tell something called truth. They have a point of view. Or they're countering some other media. And the media loves violence. I mean, if you just take a newspaper, your average major newspaper, or look at a cable news network, and how many of the stories are not about people getting killed, bombs going off, some kind of riot somewhere, or an earthquake. I mean, this is as though this is what people want to hear, and people get used to it, so I guess it's what they want to hear. How often do you have a story about, a positive story about Islam? How often do you have a positive story about Christianity or Judaism in Islamic media? So the media it's exacerbating the Islamophobia that is out there. And maybe we should step back and say, there's a lot of phobia out there. Look at homophobia. Look at how many individuals and have countries that have rules against homosexuality, for example. So there's not just one phobia. And most people who, if you're Islamophobic, you're probably anti-Semitic. Many of those people are those real, Tea Party people on the right. So most people are not only against one thing, they're against other things as well. Is that helpful for you?
Yeah. And for the last question, do you have any suggestions for a topic?
This topic, or
this topic
of how to handle it?
Yeah, and we're doing this as a graduation project actually. So.
Well, tell me what you're thinking first. How do you hope to use this information for your graduate project? What were you thinking of doing?
The topic is Islamophobia and rebuilding the image. So we hope that actually we can promote some positive images of Islam to the public and to the students even outside of universities. That's our major purpose for this project.
Okay. Well, I think the point I would make is that emphasize those aspects of Islam that are, the concern there's a concern for human rights, there's a concern for animal rights, and there are many Muslims who have written eloquently about this. There was a wonderful volume that came out after 9/11 called Progressive Islam. It was edited by Omid Safi. In fact, you should look at this website. There's a fellow at Duke University. His name is Omid Safi, S-A-F-I, and he has a blog And his blog is called, if you put his name or you put this in, What Would Muhammad Do? And he is a brilliant scholar that emphasizes the positive aspects of Islam. There are many, right? The problem is that most people only see the political. They only see the extreme. And I think it's important to say that the strength of Islam is its diversity. That there are, you have so many cultures where there are Muslims. It's not just Arabia, right? Iran is different, Afghanistan is different, Central Asia, Indonesia is not one. Think about all the different groups in Indonesia, Thailand, everywhere, Europe, US, South America has Muslims. So focus on the diversity as a strength. And I think part of the problem is that sometimes individuals, in order to defend their faith, say there's only one Islam, and it's the one I follow. That's a very dangerous point of view. It's a very dangerous, and not only is it dangerous, but it says that you as an individual have decided that this is the true Islam. There's only Allah knows that. Muhammad is not here today to tell you whether you're doing the right thing or not. Right? And the problem is that you have all these different groups saying, our way is the only way. Our way is the true way. That should give us pause and say, that is leading to conflict. And anything that is about violence is not going to help promote the beauty of Islam. See, here's the problem right now. The reason there's Islamophobia is that people are really ignorant about the sense of community, the sense of concern, of caring. It's interesting. Think about the most common phrase in Arabic. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. What are the two English words? Ar-Rahman, ar-Rahim. What are those words? Do you know?
It's the
beneficial, the merciful. We don't say Bismillah, the killer, the one who does. The most common phrase is on the mercy and what God gives. And most people are unaware of that. They probably think that Bismillah, Bismillah jihad, they think that jihad comes first before anything else. And there are elaborate rules that were created for jihad. Elaborate rules, most of the time not paid attention to. But if you go back and look at Sirat al-Nabi, he said you can never mutilate an enemy. You can never mutilate an enemy. How many of these extremist groups are just mutilating individuals? Okay, can you imagine the Prophet allowing someone to rape a woman because he's Yazidi? Can you possibly imagine that, knowing what we know about the biography of the Prophet? So maybe focus on those aspects that are there in the very beginning about Muhammad, because Muhammad was not a radical extremist killer. He wasn't. You would have to be really ignorant to think that was what the Prophet Muhammad was. So maybe focus more on what's in the Sirah, in the biography. We have Ibn Hisham, we have those statements. And also maybe to help people understand that the Quran is, of course, the official statement, but it needs to be interpreted. And it's been interpreted in many, many different ways. Many, many different ways. And although the Quran is in Arabic, the Arabic that people speak today isn't necessarily the same as the one that was there when it was delivered to the Prophet Muhammad. That's a long period of time. And so we might be we often are missing the nuance of what's there. And then, of course, the same thing is true in Christianity and Judaism. People will take a verse out of context. They will take a statement out of context, not knowing that in the context it means something else, or maybe it was for a particular point of time. Like they'll often pull out that verse about kill the unbelievers. That was about when Muhammad was going back to Mecca. Did he kill any unbelievers? No. He had permission to do it, but he didn't. Is there a lesson to be learned here? As opposed to take that verse out and then define anyone you don't agree with as an unbeliever, including a fellow Muslim. Ah, I'm Sunni, your name is Ali, I'm going to kill you. That is just staggering how foolish and wrong that is. So I would say emphasize the positive aspects. They're there. They're absolutely there. Okay?
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel.
Would you like one of my cards?
Yeah, sure.